Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Science of B2B. I'm Kerry Cunningham. I head up Sixth Sense Research and Thought Leadership, and I'm a former analyst with Serious Decisions and Forrester. All right, so if you've been with us for the last couple of episodes, you know already that buyers don't interact with sellers until about 70% of the way through that buying journey. And at that point, when they first have that interaction, that point of first contact, they've already made their decision. So I used an analogy last time with the point of first contact for a culture with the Western world, an indigenous culture, and the fact that everything changes, mostly for the worse, but for better or worse, following that point of first contact, but that in B2B, that point of first contact isn't nearly as consequential as we thought. In fact, most buyers have already made their decisions at the point where that's happening, 84% of the time. So what's going on that it takes 70% of a buying journey before a buyer wants to interact? Well, I think the first thing is that buyers want to decide what they want on their own prior to being sold, right? And that's probably pretty much like most of us are when we go to a store. We've got a big purchase that we want to make. We're going to buy a car, do something like that. We're going to do our research, understand what we want, and then we're going to go out and talk to the people that we have to talk to buy that thing. But we want to have a really good idea of what that is first. And so we looked at all of the data about what buyers say that they are doing during that first 70%. Well, across the entire buying journey, a typical buying team that was about 10 people in size on average is having nearly 4,000 total, or actually more than 4,000 total interactions across that buying journey, 4,300 on average. Just 640 of those interactions are with vendors. They're typically evaluating 4 vendors in that period of time, so that's about 160 interactions, both digital and human, with each vendor that they evaluate. They evaluate 4 vendors. Right? So that's a ton of interactions. And I think everybody should pause and think about this a little bit. 4,000 something interactions, just a small fraction of which are with vendors. Buying teams are out looking around for information about how to solve their business problems, and they're looking far and wide. They're looking at data that is coming from third-party sources. They're looking at vendor data. A lot of that data does not match and line up very well. A lot of the information doesn't match and line up. Vendors, of course, want to differentiate themselves, but as you differentiate yourself as a vendor, you actually make it more difficult for your buyers to compare you directly. And so it's difficult for buyers. It takes a very long time. But there are some other fascinating things about this buying process. One is, as I mentioned last time, we know that it doesn't matter what your level in the organization is or what your role in the buying process is, you get involved with sellers at about 70% through the journey. That's what everybody says. A couple of other things that are fascinating, however. Not only do you get involved at about the same time, but you're having roughly the same number of interactions with vendors. So whether you're an influencer or the ultimate decision maker, you're having somewhere between 15 and 20 interactions with each vendor. And in fact, the financial ratifier looks like they're having more interactions, or slightly more, not statistically different, but trending more than even the champion in a buying process. So everybody is doing their due diligence, and it's hard work. Now, we are going to talk about in a future episode, we're going to talk about what happens when you add a vendor to the process. The average evaluation has 4 vendors competing for the business. What happens if you have 5, or what happens if you have 3? It's a pretty stunning difference in the amount of work that a buying team has to do. And it's also a really stunning difference in how long that buying journey takes. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more next time. For this time, it's important just to take away that, one, the buying process is very difficult. And whether the person is a high-level person in the organization or is an individual contributor, they're doing a lot of research to understand how to solve their needs. The thing that I think everybody wants to should take away from this is that you've got to make it easier. As a vendor, your job is to make buying decisions easier for your buyers. Enable your buyers. If you have content that could be useful to your buyers in any way, get it out in front of forums. If your content is not findable because your website's not constructed, because you're not doing SEO, whatever the reasons are, you've got to fix that. Not only so you'll get better results, but so your buyers can do a better job of buying and take less time to do it. And if you're the vendor that makes it easiest to understand what they need and what you offer and where that fits, you're probably going to improve your chances of getting that business. All right, so that's it for today's quick episode. It's really important that we enable buyers. Next time, we're going to talk about how many interactions buyers are having again, but we're going to look at that in terms of understanding the length of a buying cycle and why some cycles are longer than others. We're also going to talk about in one of the upcoming episodes how much of that traffic that you see on your website has form fills attached to it and how much of it is anonymous, and then what you can do about it. Just a reminder that you can find all of the data that I'm referencing here in a couple of reports that we've done. First is the buyer experience report that you can find on our website, and another is called a buyer identification study and benchmark, and that has a lot to say about what your peers are doing to identify buyers. Now, one of the reasons we did these two things together is to understand the reality of the buying process and to understand how marketers are going about identifying those buying processes. And a little preview here, they're not very well aligned, and that's a big part of why we wanted to do this series again. All right, thanks everybody.